The moment you choose kindness in a place that rewards silence, you risk losing everything. The words echoed in Emily Carter's mind as she stood behind the reception desk of Bennett Industries, adjusting the edges of her worn navy blazer that had been washed so many times the fabric had begun to soften at the seams. The lobby in front of her was all glass and steel, polished marble floors reflecting the movement of executives who walked too quickly to notice anyone without a title. Emily checked the clock again, 8:14 a.m., already 14 minutes into her shift, and she silently prayed that today would be calm, predictable, something she could survive without another warning from management. Her phone buzzed inside her pocket, and she didn't need to look to know it was the daycare center again. Her 5-year-old son, Ethan, had woken up earlier that morning with a fever of 101.3, and the thought of him lying in a small cot under a thin blanket made her chest tighten. But she couldn't leave. Not today, not with rent due in 6 days and her account sitting dangerously close to empty. The sound of a sudden commotion pulled her attention toward the main entrance where a delivery cart had tipped slightly, scattering a stack of documents across the polished floor, and before anyone else moved, Emily stepped out from behind the desk and knelt down without hesitation. A man nearby, dressed in plain maintenance clothes, crouched beside her and silently began helping gather the papers, their hands briefly meeting as they reached for the same folder, and for a split second, Emily noticed his eyes, calm, observant, almost too steady for someone who claimed to be just another worker. "You don't have to do this," he said quietly, his voice low enough that only she could hear over the hum of the lobby. "It's fine," Emily replied, stacking the last of the papers neatly. It would take them longer to complain about it than to fix it. The man studied her for a moment longer than necessary, as if measuring something beyond the situation itself, then simply nodded and helped her stand. Around them, no one else seemed to care, executives stepping over the edge of the disruption. Without breaking stride, security guards glancing once before looking away, and in that small pocket of overlooked chaos, Emily felt something she had grown used to, invisibility. A sharp voice broke through the moment. "Carter." It was Mr. Collins, her supervisor, already approaching with a tight expression that meant trouble before he even spoke. "Office. Now." Emily's stomach sank as she followed him past the front desk, past the rows of silent monitors, past the glass walls that separated authority from everyone else, and she could feel the eyes of her coworkers briefly follow her before returning to their screens. In Collins' office, the air was colder, controlled, as if warmth itself had been edited out. He didn't offer her a seat. He simply placed a printed security report on the desk between them. "We reviewed the footage," he said flatly. Emily glanced down and saw herself, clearly visible on the lobby camera, helping the maintenance worker, stopping to gather papers, delaying the cleanup response by exactly 2 minutes and 43 seconds. "You left your post," Collins continued, tapping the paper once, "and that violates protocol." "There was an accident in the lobby," Emily said quietly. "I was the first one there." "Not your responsibility," he replied without looking up. The silence that followed felt heavier than the words. Emily swallowed, thinking of Ethan again, of medicine she still needed to buy, of the thin envelope of cash hidden in her kitchen drawer that would not last the month. "I understand," she said finally, though she didn't agree. Collins leaned back slightly, already done with the conversation. "Effective immediately, you're suspended pending review." The words landed without emotion, procedural, final. Emily didn't argue. She simply nodded once, because arguing never changed outcomes here, only extended them. As she turned to leave, she caught one last glimpse of the lobby through the glass wall. The maintenance worker was still there, watching quietly, unmoving among the flow of people, and for a reason she couldn't explain, something about his expression stayed with her longer than it should have, as if he had seen more than just an accident on a polished floor. And somewhere deep within the building, unseen and unannounced, Noah Bennett closed a tablet displaying the security feed, his face unreadable as he quietly observed the woman who had just been removed for doing what no one else had bothered to do. Emily Carter stood outside the glass doors of Bennett Industries with her arms wrapped tightly around herself, not because of the cold morning air, but because of the sudden emptiness that followed being told she no longer had a place to return to. Cars passed along the street in slow, steady motion. Office workers hurried past her without looking up, and the city carried on as if nothing inside that building had just ended her only source of stability. She checked her phone again, a habit she could not break even though she already knew there would be no new messages from her supervisor. Only a reminder from the daycare that her son Ethan still had a fever of 101 degrees Fahrenheit and needed to be picked up early if she could not find alternative care. Her throat tightened as she stared at the screen, her fingers hesitating over what little money she had left in her account, knowing it would not stretch far enough to cover both rent and medication if this situation lasted more than a few days. Inside the building, behind layers of glass and steel, Noah Bennett stood in a private monitoring room that most employees did not even know existed, watching the footage of Emily gathering papers without complaint, watching the moment Mr. Collins dismissed her with procedural efficiency that lacked any awareness of consequence. His expression remained still, but his eyes tracked every detail, the way she had helped without hesitation, the way she had not tried to defend herself, and most of all the way she had accepted punishment without anger, as if she had already learned that fairness was not something guaranteed in her world. One of the executives standing beside him cleared his throat cautiously. "Sir, should we proceed with the standard disciplinary record filing?" he asked. Noah did not respond immediately. Instead, he replayed the moment she had said it was fine, as if helping someone had simply been the only logical option available to her. After a long pause, he finally spoke. "Tell me something," he said quietly, still looking at the screen. "How many employees in this building would stop to help a stranger if they believed no one was watching?" The executive hesitated, unsure whether it was a rhetorical question or a test. "Very few, I would assume," he replied carefully. Noah nodded once, almost imperceptibly, then turned away from the screen. "And yet she did it knowing everyone was watching," he said, more to himself than anyone else. Outside, Emily began walking toward the bus stop, her steps slower than usual as exhaustion finally settled into her body. She adjusted the strap of her worn bag and tried to think logically, calculating how many hours she could pick up extra shifts at the diner later that week, whether she could borrow a small amount from a coworker, whether she could delay the electricity bill one more time. Her thoughts kept breaking, however, every time she pictured Ethan lying in bed with flushed cheeks and tired eyes asking when she would come home. She stopped briefly at a corner store, staring at the rows of inexpensive medicine through the window, then turned away because even the smallest bottle would require money she no longer had access to. Meanwhile, in the building above her, Noah removed the maintenance uniform jacket he had been wearing and placed it carefully on a chair, the disguise that had allowed him to move unseen among his own employees suddenly feeling heavier than before. He opened a private file on his tablet, one that contained employee evaluations, attendance records, and performance summaries, and for the first time, he did not look at numbers or efficiency ratings. Instead, he searched for one name: Emily Carter. Her file was minimal, almost overlooked, a pattern he now realized was not accidental, but reflective of how easily people like her were forgotten in systems built for convenience rather than compassion. He closed the file and stood still for a moment, staring out through the floor-to-ceiling window at the city below, where she was now just another figure, moving through traffic unaware that she had already been seen more clearly than anyone else in the building. And in that silence, a decision began forming, not spoken, not announced, but inevitable, because something about what he had witnessed could not be ignored, and what he was about to do next would shift the balance of everything she believed about the world she had just been removed from. Emily Carter sat on a wooden bench at the bus stop with her hands folded tightly in her lap, staring at the cracked pavement as if it might offer an answer she could not find anywhere else. The morning had already shifted into late afternoon, and the heat of the city pressed down on everything, making the air feel heavier than it should have been. She checked her phone again, not because she expected news, but because her mind refused to accept silence as final. The daycare had sent another message confirming that Ethan's fever had slightly improved but still required monitoring, and the small relief that should have comforted her was immediately replaced by the weight of uncertainty about how she would manage the next day or the day after that. Across the city, inside the top floor of Bennett Industries, Noah Bennett stood alone in his office with his hands resting on the edge of a long glass table, reviewing internal reports that suddenly felt meaningless compared to what he had seen earlier. He had spent years building systems designed to measure performance, efficiency, and compliance. Yet none of those metrics had ever accounted for the kind of decision Emily had made without hesitation. A soft knock came at the door, and his assistant entered with a tablet. "Sir, Mr. Collins submitted the termination documentation for the employee involved in the lobby incident," she said carefully. Noah did not turn around immediately. "Is there anything in the report that reflects negligence?" he asked. The assistant hesitated before responding. "No, sir. It states procedural violation only." A long silence followed, during which Noah's gaze remained fixed on the skyline beyond the glass, where thousands of lives continued without interruption or awareness of the decisions being made above them. Finally he spoke. "Reverse it," he said calmly. The assistant blinked. "Sir?" she asked. Noah turned slightly, his expression unreadable but firm. "The suspension. It is not valid." She did not violate procedure. She responded to a situation that required human judgment. The assistant nodded quickly and left, and the room returned to silence, but Noah did not move. Instead, he reopened Emily Carter's file on his tablet and added a private note that did not belong in any official system. Outside, Emily finally boarded the bus, finding a seat near the window as the city slowly blurred into motion. She leaned her head against the glass and allowed herself a rare moment of stillness, though even then her thoughts refused to quiet. She replayed the morning in fragments, wondering if she had done something wrong without realizing it, wondering if kindness was now something that carried consequences she had not been prepared for. When she arrived home, her apartment was quiet except for the faint sound of a neighbor's television through the wall. Ethan was asleep on the couch under a thin blanket, his breathing softer now, and she knelt beside him for a moment, brushing her fingers lightly across his forehead to confirm that his temperature had gone down slightly. Relief washed over her, fragile but real, and she exhaled slowly as if she had been holding her breath all day. Her phone buzzed again, and this time it was not from the daycare or a bill collector, but from an unknown number. She hesitated before opening it. The message was brief and direct. "Your employment status has been reinstated. Please report tomorrow at 9 in the morning. Further instructions will follow." Emily stared at the screen for a long time, confusion replacing exhaustion. There was no signature, no explanation, only a certainty that did not match anything she understood about how decisions were made in her world. At the same moment, in a private conference room high above the city, Noah Bennett stood before a board of senior executives who had gathered without knowing the true reason for the meeting. "We will be reviewing internal leadership conduct," he said evenly, his voice calm but carrying authority that silenced any side conversations immediately. Mr. Collins sat among them, shifting slightly in his chair as the agenda began to unfold in a direction he had not anticipated. Noah continued, "There are systems in place that were designed to protect fairness and accountability, but those systems are only as strong as the judgment of the people who operate them." As he spoke, his thoughts briefly returned to Emily, standing alone in the lobby earlier that day, choosing action over caution without expecting recognition. For Noah, it was no longer an isolated incident. It was a reflection of something larger that he had failed to see within his own company. And as the meeting progressed, decisions began to form that would not only affect policies and personnel, but would slowly begin to connect two lives that had not yet fully understood why they had already been placed on the same path. The next morning arrived with a strange stillness in the city, as if the usual noise of traffic and urgency had been muted just enough for something unseen to shift beneath it. Emily Carter stood in front of her small bathroom mirror, fastening the same worn blazer she had worn the day before, her movements slower than usual, not from exhaustion alone, but from uncertainty about what the message she had received truly meant. The email had not explained anything, only instructed her to return to Bennett Industries at exactly 9 in the morning, and the lack of context weighed on her more than any rejection ever had. She checked on Ethan one more time before leaving, brushing a loose strand of hair from his forehead, reassured by the steadier rhythm of his breathing as he slept. At precisely the same hour, on the upper floors of Bennett Industries, Noah Bennett stood in front of a conference room filled with senior leadership, the atmosphere tense but controlled. The long table reflected the overhead lights like a still surface waiting for disruption. Mr. Collins sat among them, composed on the outside but visibly aware that something about this meeting was different from routine operations. Noah placed a single folder on the table and opened it. Without urgency. "Before we proceed with quarterly reviews," he said calmly, "we need to address a failure in internal conduct that reflects not on performance metrics, but on values." The room shifted slightly, attention narrowing. "Yesterday," Noah continued, "an employee responded to an unexpected situation in our main lobby. She assisted someone in need without hesitation, without instruction, and without regard for her own convenience." He paused briefly, letting the words settle. That employee was terminated. A faint murmur moved through the room, but Noah raised a hand, and silence returned immediately. "That decision has been reversed," he added. "Effective immediately." Mr. Collins straightened in his chair, clearing his throat. "Sir, the report indicated a procedural violation regarding workstation abandonment." Noah turned his gaze toward him directly. "Then the procedure is flawed," he replied evenly, without raising his voice. The statement landed with more weight than any argument could have carried. Across the city, Emily stepped off the bus and stood outside the entrance of Bennett Industries once again, her heart tightening as she looked up at the same glass tower that had ended her job just days earlier. This time, however, something felt different. The atmosphere inside was not the same as before. Employees moved with a quieter rhythm, and when she approached the reception desk, the usual dismissive glance from security did not come. Instead, she was directed upward without hesitation, as if her presence had already been anticipated. When the elevator doors opened on the executive floor, she hesitated for only a moment before stepping forward. The corridor stretched ahead with polished surfaces and controlled lighting, leading her toward a set of double doors that opened before she even reached them. Inside, Noah Bennett stood alone near a wide conference table, his expression composed but attentive as he turned toward her. For a brief moment, neither of them spoke. Emily felt the weight of the room immediately, the quiet precision of a space designed for decisions that affected thousands of people, and yet she could not understand why she had been brought into it. "You asked for me," she said carefully, her voice steady but cautious. Noah studied her for a moment longer than necessary, not in judgment, but in recognition of something that could not be measured in reports or systems. "I did not ask for you," he replied, his tone calm. "I made sure you were not dismissed for what you did." Emily's confusion deepened. "I do not understand," she said honestly. Noah gestured slightly toward the chair across from him, but she did not sit yet. Instead, she remained standing, grounded in instinct rather than authority. "What I saw yesterday," he continued, "was not a violation of procedure. It was a decision made without hesitation to help someone else when there was no advantage in doing so." He paused, then added, "That kind of decision is rare in environments like this one." Emily looked at him, searching for clarity, but finding none that matched the world she knew. "People told me I broke the rules," she said quietly. "Then the rules are incomplete," Noah responded. The simplicity of the statement lingered in the air, unchallenged and direct. For the first time since she had entered the building, Emily felt that she was not being evaluated, but observed, as if something about her presence carried weight she had never been allowed to recognize. And somewhere beyond the glass walls of the room, decisions were already in motion that would begin to redefine not only her position within the company, but the quiet understanding forming between two lives that had never been meant to intersect under ordinary circumstances. Emily Carter finally stepped into the conference room, her fingers lightly brushing the edge of the chair Noah Bennett had gestured toward, though she still chose to stand, as if sitting would make the situation more permanent than she was ready to accept. The air inside the room felt different from anywhere else in the building, quieter, controlled, almost detached from the usual rhythm of corporate movement she had grown used to on the lower floors. Noah remained standing near the head of the table, his attention steady but not intimidating, as if he was waiting for something beyond her presence, something deeper than explanation. Emily broke the silence first. "I was told my termination was a result of breaking procedure," she said carefully, her voice calm, but carrying the weight of confusion she had not yet been able to resolve. Noah nodded once, acknowledging the statement without immediately answering it. That is what the report concluded, he said. But reports are only as accurate as the assumptions behind them. Emily's gaze tightened slightly, unsure where the conversation was leading. Then what is this about? She asked, if not the report. Noah turned slightly toward the window for a moment, as if collecting his thoughts from a place further away than the room itself. It is about what happens when someone chooses action over hesitation, he replied. In most systems, hesitation is rewarded because it reduces risk. But what I observed was not recklessness. It was awareness. Emily did not respond immediately. She had never been spoken to like this in a professional environment, where actions were usually reduced to compliance or violation, success or failure. Noah continued, his tone steady. You did not stop to evaluate personal consequence. You responded to a situation that required immediate human judgment. That cannot be measured in standard metrics. Emily finally lowered herself into the chair, not because she felt comfortable, but because the weight of standing had become harder to maintain under the intensity of being analyzed in a way she did not understand. I just helped someone, she said quietly, almost as if trying to simplify something that was being made overly complex. Noah looked at her directly. That is exactly my point, he said. A brief silence followed, and for the first time Emily noticed that there were no distractions in the room, no phones, no background conversations, no interruptions of any kind. It felt like a space designed for truth rather than performance. What happens now? She asked, uncertain whether she was asking about her job or something else entirely. Noah took a step closer to the table, but remained at a respectful distance. Now, he said, we correct a decision that should never have been made in the first place. Emily studied him carefully, searching for hidden meaning, but his expression remained consistent, neither defensive nor performative, only deliberate. And my job, she pressed gently, is it restored because of this conversation? Noah shook his head slightly. Your job was never the issue, he replied. The issue is how easily people in this organization stop seeing value when it does not align with convenience. Emily looked down briefly, absorbing the implication, then asked the question she had been holding since stepping into the building. Why does this matter to you? The question hung in the air longer than anything else that had been said. Noah did not answer immediately. Instead, he moved toward the window again, looking out at the city below where thousands of people moved without awareness of the decisions being made above them. Because systems like this, he finally said, only work if people believe kindness is optional. He turned back toward her. And I am no longer certain that is true. Emily did not know how to respond to that, because it was not an accusation or a reassurance, but something in between, something that challenged the foundation of how she understood the environment she worked in. For a brief moment, neither of them spoke, and in that silence something unspoken began to form, not as agreement, not as trust, but as recognition that their perspectives on the same moment had been fundamentally different from everyone else who had witnessed it. Outside the room, the building continued its usual operations, unaware that a single decision had already begun to shift the internal structure of authority and perception within its walls. And inside that quiet space, Emily Carter remained seated for the first time since arriving, not because she had accepted anything yet, but because she was beginning to understand that the conversation she had been pulled into was not about what she had done yesterday, but about what it meant in a world that rarely paused long enough to notice it at all. The following morning, Emily Carter returned to Bennett Industries not as an employee expecting routine work, but as someone stepping into uncertainty without any clear understanding of what had truly changed behind the scenes. The lobby felt the same at first glance, the same polished floors, the same controlled movement of staff and visitors, yet she could sense a subtle difference in how people glanced at her as she passed through reception, as if her presence carried an unfamiliar weight that had not existed before. She was escorted upward without resistance, the elevator ride unusually quiet, the digital numbers increasing one floor at a time while she stared at her reflection in the mirrored doors, trying to steady her thoughts. On the upper level, Noah Bennett was already in a private office adjacent to the main conference area, reviewing internal communications that had shifted overnight in tone and urgency. Mr. Collins had submitted a formal response to the reversal of Emily's termination, and several executives had requested clarification regarding the decision. Noah closed the document without expression and turned when the door opened. Emily stepped inside, more composed than the previous day, though her eyes still carried hesitation. "I was told to come here," she said calmly. Noah nodded once. "Yes," he replied, "because there is still something unfinished." She remained near the entrance, not yet moving closer. "My employment status was restored," she said, seeking confirmation rather than permission. "It was," Noah answered, "but that is not the end of what needs to be addressed." Emily studied him carefully, sensing that this was not about paperwork or procedure anymore. "Then what is it about?" she asked. Noah walked slowly toward the center of the room, maintaining distance that felt intentional rather than distant. "It is about understanding the environment you are part of," he said, "and the decisions that environment produces without question." Emily frowned slightly. "I do not understand what you mean." Noah paused, choosing his words with precision. "When you helped someone in the lobby, you were seen by multiple systems, multiple people, and multiple levels of authority," he said. "And yet none of those systems recognized the value of what you did. Instead, they only registered deviation." Emily crossed her arms lightly, not in defensiveness, but in an attempt to ground herself. "I did not do it for recognition," she said quietly. "I just did what felt right." Noah nodded again, as if that answer confirmed something he had already suspected. "That is exactly why it matters," he replied. A brief silence settled between them, not uncomfortable, but heavy with implication. Emily looked down for a moment, then back up. "So what happens now?" she asked again. "Do I just return to my desk and continue as if nothing happened?" Noah did not answer immediately. Instead, he walked toward a side table where a set of documents had been prepared. "That depends," he said finally, "on whether you believe this company is capable of recognizing value that does not fit predefined categories." Emily took a step forward, her curiosity now overriding hesitation. "Are you saying the system is wrong?" she asked. Noah looked at her directly. "I am saying the system is incomplete," he replied. "And people like you expose that incompleteness without even trying." Emily felt a shift in the conversation, subtle but significant, as if she was no longer being evaluated as an individual employee, but as part of a broader question she had not been told she was involved in. "What are you asking me to do?" she said carefully. Noah placed the documents on the table between them. "I am not asking you to do anything yet," he said. "I am asking you to understand what your actions revealed." Emily hesitated before approaching the table. She glanced down at the documents, noticing internal notes, timestamps, and references to the incident she had thought was already concluded. "Why is this still being discussed at this level?" she asked. Noah's expression remained steady. "Because it forced a question that this company has avoided for a long time," he said. "What do we reward, and what do we ignore?" Emily remained silent, absorbing the weight of the question rather than responding immediately. For the first time, she began to sense that her actions had extended beyond a single moment in a lobby and had instead become something that reached into structures she had never seen. Noah stepped slightly closer, though still maintaining respectful distance. "You are not in trouble," he said quietly, "but you are also not invisible anymore." Emily looked up at him, uncertainty still present, but now mixed with something else, something closer to realization. And in that moment, within the quiet architecture of glass walls and controlled lighting, the boundary between ordinary work and something far more significant began to blur, as both of them stood at the edge of a change neither had fully defined yet, but both had already begun to recognize as irreversible. Emily Carter remained seated in the conference room long after the conversation had shifted into silence, her hands resting lightly on the edge of the chair, as if anchoring herself to something stable in a space that no longer felt predictable. The words Noah Bennett had spoken continued to echo in her mind, not as instructions or judgments, but as questions she had never been asked before. She had spent years in environments where performance was measured in efficiency and compliance, yet none of those systems had ever considered the meaning behind a single decision made in a moment of instinct. Noah stood near the far end of the room, reviewing a second set of internal reports that had just been delivered from legal and human resources, each document reflecting the ripple effect of what had happened in the lobby 2 days earlier. The silence between them was not empty, but full of something unresolved. Emily finally spoke. "If I had known that helping him would lead to all of this," she said quietly, "I would still have done it." Noah looked up immediately, as if that answer confirmed something he had been expecting but had not allowed himself to assume. That is precisely why this situation matters, he replied. Emily frowned slightly. Because I did not think about consequences? She asked. Noah stepped away from the table, closing the distance between clarity and uncertainty rather than between himself and her. Because you did not calculate advantage, he said. You acted without asking what you would gain in return. Emily lowered her gaze briefly, absorbing the implication. That is not unusual where I come from, she said. Noah studied her carefully. Then you have been surrounded by systems that discourage what I am trying to understand, he said. A pause followed, measured and deliberate. Emily looked up again. And what exactly are you trying to understand? She asked. Noah did not answer immediately. Instead, he walked toward the window, where the city stretched outward in controlled motion, each building a reflection of structured ambition. Whether integrity still exists without incentive, he said finally. The statement lingered in the air between them, heavier than any corporate language or procedural explanation. Emily leaned forward slightly, resting her forearms on her knees. People do the right thing every day, she said. They just do not expect to be rewarded for it. Noah turned back toward her. Expectation is not the issue, he replied. Visibility is. Emily hesitated. Visibility? She repeated. Noah nodded once. In this organization, most actions are only acknowledged when they align with measurable outcomes, he said. What you did not fit that structure, so it was ignored until it became inconvenient. Emily felt a quiet tension rise in her chest, not anger, but recognition. So what happens to people like me, she asked, when they do not fit? Noah paused before answering, his voice steady but lower than before. That is what I am trying to change, he said. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The room outside remained active, distant footsteps and muted voices passing through corridors that felt disconnected from the stillness inside. Emily stood slowly, moving closer to the table where the documents remained open, her eyes scanning lines of internal language that reduced human actions into categories and ratings. I have never been part of anything like this, she said honestly. Noah responded without hesitation. That is why you are here, he said. Emily looked at him, uncertainty still present, but now joined by something more complex, something closer to cautious understanding. You are not asking me to defend myself, she said. Noah shook his head slightly. No, he replied. I am asking you to remain exactly as you are. The simplicity of that statement unsettled her more than criticism ever had. She had spent years adjusting, adapting, and surviving in environments that required constant justification. Yet here she was being told that nothing she had done needed explanation. Emily slowly sat back down, not because she was instructed to, but because the weight of the conversation required grounding. What happens next? She asked quietly. Noah returned to the table, placing the documents aside. Next, he said, we observe what changes when people like you are no longer dismissed by default. Emily did not fully understand what that meant, but for the first time since entering the building, she felt that the conversation was not about correcting her behavior, but about reconsidering the system that had reacted to it. And in that realization, a quiet shift began to take shape, not visible in any report or meeting, but present in the space between two people who were beginning to see the same moment through completely different perspectives that were slowly, inevitably, starting to align. The following morning carried a different energy inside Bennett Industries, one that Emily Carter could feel the moment she stepped through the entrance, even before anyone said a single word to her. The usual rhythm of hurried employees, ringing phones, and routine indifference seemed slightly disrupted, as if something unseen had shifted overnight, and people were still adjusting without fully understanding why. Emily walked through the lobby with measured steps, aware that eyes lingered a fraction longer than before, not in judgment, but in curiosity that had not been there during her previous shifts. She was guided upward once again, but this time the escort was not procedural, it was attentive, as if her arrival had been anticipated rather than processed. When the elevator doors opened, she found Noah Bennett already waiting near the conference area, his presence calm but focused, as though he had been considering the same set of thoughts for a long time before she arrived. Emily approached slowly, stopping a few feet away from him, unsure of what version of the situation she was stepping into. Things feel different today, she said quietly. Noah nodded once. They are beginning to be, he replied. She studied him carefully, still searching for clarity in a situation that refused to define itself in simple terms. Because of me? She asked. Noah did not answer immediately, and when he finally spoke, his tone remained steady. Because of what your actions revealed, he said. Emily looked down briefly, then back up. I am not sure I understand the difference, she admitted. Noah gestured toward the conference room behind him. Come inside, he said. The room was the same as before, structured, quiet, and controlled, yet now there were additional documents on the table, organized into categories that Emily did not recognize at first glance. She remained standing near the entrance while Noah took a seat at the head of the table. Over the last 48 hours, he began. Internal review processes have been triggered across multiple departments. Emily frowned slightly. Because of what happened in the lobby, she said. Noah shook his head. Because of how it was interpreted, he corrected. She moved closer to the table, glancing at the documents. And how was it interpreted? She asked. Noah paused, then answered. As an anomaly, he said, something that did not align with expected behavioral patterns within the organization. Emily exhaled slowly, processing the implication. So instead of seeing it as something simple, she said, it became a problem. Noah looked at her directly. That is one way to describe it, he replied. A brief silence followed, and Emily placed her hands lightly on the edge of the table, steadying herself. What do you want from me in all of this? She asked. Noah leaned back slightly, considering the question not as pressure, but as clarification. I do not want anything from you, he said. I want to understand what happens when someone like you is placed inside a system that was not designed to recognize people like you. Emily straightened slightly. People like me, she repeated. Noah nodded. People who act without filtering every decision through personal gain, he said. That is not common here. Emily looked at him for a long moment, then spoke with quiet honesty. It is common where I come from, she said. Noah acknowledged that with a slight nod, as if it confirmed a hypothesis he had already begun to form. Then perhaps the system is not measuring what it thinks it is measuring, he said. Emily moved around the table slowly, her eyes still scanning the documents, noticing patterns of language that reduced human actions into compliance scores and efficiency notes. This feels very far removed from what actually happened, she said. Noah stood and joined her at the table. That is the problem, he replied. Most of what is recorded here is interpretation, not reality. Emily looked up at him. Then what is reality in your system? She asked. Noah did not answer immediately. Instead, he walked toward the window, looking out at the city in silence before speaking. Reality, he said finally, is what people choose to do when no one is telling them what is correct. Emily absorbed that without responding, the weight of it settling into her thoughts in a way she could not immediately articulate. She had spent years believing that correctness was defined by rules, schedules, and instructions, yet everything in the last 2 days suggested that something else entirely might exist beneath those structures. Noah turned back toward her. You are not being evaluated anymore, he said. Emily blinked slightly. What does that mean? She asked. Noah's expression remained composed. It means you are no longer a variable in a performance system, he replied. You are now part of an observation of how that system reacts to something it does not usually account for. Emily remained still, processing the shift in language, recognizing that she had moved from being judged to being observed, though neither felt fully familiar. And what happens after you observe it? She asked. Noah looked at her for a moment longer than before, then answered with measured clarity. We decide whether it needs to change, he said. The room fell into silence again, but it was no longer empty. It was filled with the quiet tension of something unresolved, something expanding beyond the boundaries of routine corporate structure. And as Emily Carter stood beside the table, no longer dismissed, no longer ignored, she began to understand that whatever had started in a single moment of kindness was now unfolding into something far larger than either of them had fully named, yet both were already unable to stop thinking about. Emily Carter remained standing by the conference table as the weight of everything said in the room continued to settle around her, not as pressure, but as a slow unfolding realization that nothing about her situation was as isolated as she had once believed. The documents in front of her had been reorganized again since the last time she saw them, now grouped into broader categories that reflected not just her actions, but patterns of employee response across multiple departments. Noah Bennett stood near the window for a long moment before turning back toward her, his expression unchanged but his focus sharper than before. "There is something I need you to understand," he said quietly. Emily looked up immediately, attentive but cautious. "What is it?" she asked. Noah walked back toward the table, stopping just short of it. "What happened in the lobby was not an isolated incident," he said. "It was part of a larger pattern that we have been failing to recognize." Emily frowned slightly. "A pattern of what exactly?" she asked. Noah paused, choosing his words carefully. "Of decision-making under pressure without instruction," he said. Emily studied him, unsure where this was leading. "People make decisions like that every day," she said. Noah nodded once. "Exactly," he replied. "But not everyone is allowed to keep their position after doing so." A silence followed, heavier than before, not uncomfortable but revealing. Emily slowly sat down again, her hands resting on the table as she processed what he was implying. "Are you saying this is not about me at all?" she asked, "but about how the company reacts to people like me?" Noah did not correct her. Instead, he answered with calm precision. "I am saying you are the first clear example of something we have been measuring incorrectly for a long time," he said. Emily looked down at the table, her voice quieter when she spoke again. "I do not feel like an example," she said. Noah's tone softened slightly. "That is because you are not trying to be one," he replied. The room fell into another stretch of silence, this one longer, as if both of them were allowing the meaning of that exchange to fully settle. Emily eventually looked up again. "What happens now?" she asked. "If I do not want to be part of whatever this is?" Noah did not hesitate. "Then nothing changes for you," he said. "You continue your work as before, and this conversation ends here." Emily absorbed that answer, surprised by its lack of pressure. "And if I do want to understand it?" she asked carefully. Noah met her gaze directly. "Then you will need to see more than just one department, one decision, or one outcome," he said. "You will need to see how the entire structure responds when human judgment does not align with expectation." Emily leaned back slightly in her chair, thinking through everything she had experienced in the past several days. "Why me?" she asked finally. Noah turned toward the window again before answering. "Because you were not trying to prove anything," he said. "You were simply responding to what was in front of you." Emily frowned. "That does not make me special," she said. Noah shook his head slightly. "It makes you unfiltered," he replied. The word lingered in the air between them, unfamiliar in this context. Emily repeated it quietly. "Unfiltered," she said. Noah nodded. "Most decisions inside this organization are filtered through risk, hierarchy, and consequence," he explained. "Yours was not." Emily looked down at her hands for a moment, then back up. "That is not something I learned intentionally," she said. Noah acknowledged that with a subtle nod. "Which is exactly why it matters," he said. Another silence followed, but this one felt different, less about uncertainty and more about transition. Emily finally stood again, her posture steadier than before. "I still do not know what role I am supposed to play in all of this," she said. Noah stepped closer, his tone remaining measured. "You are not being assigned a role," he said. "You are being asked to remain present while we examine how decisions like yours are treated." Emily studied him for a long moment, then slowly nodded, not in agreement, but in understanding that the situation was no longer something she could step away from without acknowledging its existence. "And what do you expect to find?" she asked. Noah looked at her directly. "Whether this company is designed to recognize value," he said, "or simply to enforce conformity." The words settled heavily in the space between them, marking the first time the conversation had moved beyond her actions and into the structure surrounding them. Emily did not respond immediately. Instead, she turned slightly toward the window, seeing the city below in a way that felt different than before, as if she was no longer just looking at buildings and movement, but at systems layered over human decisions she had never been meant to question. And in that quiet moment, standing within a space she had entered as an employee but was now occupying as something else entirely, Emily Carter began to understand that the boundary between ordinary work and something far larger had already been crossed, even if neither of them had yet defined what lay on the other side.